As Mary said, I'm going to talk about economics. It's fairly short, and I'm just going to go through a few pointers. But the first thing I'd like to do is talk a bit about why I'm here. As Mary said, I'm a businessman. I'm in manufacturing. I worked for a number of big and small manufacturing companies over the years, and about 9 or 10 years ago I ended up doing business myself. And with my business partner, we've got manufacturing businesses in Scotland, England and Eastern Europe. And when the referendum came up a couple of years ago, I thought it would make sense to have a look at it and understand what impact it would have on me and my business, my family. So what I did was have a look at it as if it was a business deal. If Scotland was a company, Scotland PLC, is it something you'd want to invest your money in, or would you want to steer well clear of it? And the way I did that was to go and dig up all the numbers and spreadsheets and sit down and analyse it like it was something I was going to get involved in from a business point of view. And what I found surprised me, because like you're probably led to believe over the decades that Scotland was too poor, was subsidised by England, couldn't afford to do anything on our own. But when you actually look at the numbers, it's quite the opposite. And I'll talk you through a flavour of that in a minute. And then I kind of got involved in Business for Scotland in the early days when it was setting up, and I went along to a meeting and kind of put my hand up and volunteered for something and put my toe in the water, and before long I was in swimming with the sharks, and it's been fun. So okay, let's start on the substance of this. The first thing is that this is a rich country, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Scotland generates more tax per person than the UK average, and if you look at the data for the last 5 years, that's the numbers. So every one of those 5 years, Scotland generated more tax per person than the UK average, and the 5-year average at the end there, over the 5 years, we're averaging £10,000 per person in tax take, in the UK less than £9,000. So we generate the wealth. That includes all tax, income tax, national insurance, VAT, corporation tax, road tax, the whole lot added up together, divided by the population. So the wealth is there. The question is what happens to it. Now if you look back over history, it's not just the last year or the last 5 years. We've got data going back to 1980, and that's the graph going back to 1980. The dark line being Scotland's tax take per person, the line below that being the UK average. So in every one of those years, Scotland generated more tax per head than the UK average per person. In some years a bit more, in other times like the early mid-80s and then later in the 2000s, a lot more. The question, as I say, is what happens to that wealth. And look at gross domestic product, which is the national income in total, the amount of activity in the economy, and this is how internationally they measure the wealth of countries. And again, Scotland's richer than the UK average, 11% richer last year, 18% richer the year before, and the same story going back through as far back as 1980, and almost certainly earlier than that from the data we have seen, but we don't have the full data going back further than that. And as was mentioned before, in independent Scotland, on the way these things are measured, GDP per head international, the 14th richest country in last year's numbers, with the UK several places below 18. So we certainly do pay our way. And it's interesting if you look at the list of richest countries in the world. That's the top 9 a couple of years ago. And you look at the countries that are on there, and it's Luxembourg, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, Denmark, Austria. It's all small, independent, North and West European countries. And the reason that small countries do better is because their communication's easier, they're faster, they're responsive, they take advantage of opportunities quicker, they're easier to organise, they're more democratic because the people have got a closer connection to the elected politicians. And if they do get into trouble, they're able to get out of it quicker because they can react quicker and deal with the problems. And you see that happens. And over the decades, it's the small to medium-sized countries that have gravitated to the top of the World Wealth League. And if you look at those countries, with the exception of Norway, and I'll talk a bit about that later, but in general, those countries have a lot less natural resources than Scotland does. So we've got a tremendous opportunity to join them and do better than most of them. The two countries up there that aren't in that kind of category are the United States and Australia, who obviously have got their own vast natural resources and other advantages that they use. And the other thing both of those countries have got in common, of course, is that they both used to be ruled by London until they became independent. you don't look at, hasn't done them any harm, and you don't look at either of those countries queuing up to go back under Westminster control anytime soon. So, that's a comment from the Standard & Poor's report that came out at the earlier part of this year and talked about Scotland's economy. And the reason I put that up, I mean, I could put up endless quotes from international agencies, but I just put that one up because it talks about the wealth of Scotland's economy. It talks about it being a rich and diversified economy. Oil is only 15% of Scotland's economy. And interestingly, even without oil, Scotland's wealth is the same as the UK average. So oil is very much the bonus, the icing on the cake. And the question is what we do with the second half of the oil bonanza. Do we let Westminster waste it, or do we invest it for the future of Scotland, for future generations? And Standard & Poor's were quite clear, even excluding the oil, just looking at our onshore economic activity, Scotland would qualify for their highest economic assessment. And they're the agencies, one of the agencies that recommends to the money markets whether to lend to countries and what rates to lend to them at. So what they think is of value. So the next part, and that's me kind of finished with the numbers now, I'm going to show you some maps that are quite interesting. The first one is about where does the wealth come from, and this is European statistics, Eurostat, and it's a map of the UK, different parts of the UK, and where the wealth is generated. Okay, so it's GDP per person for different parts of the UK, and the darker the colour, the more wealth is generated in that part of the UK. So if you look at the map, you see the City of London generates a lot of value. If you go along the M4 corridor down towards the south coast, there's some parts of the country that are quite economically strong. The northwest of England down Manchester, and then the northeast of Scotland, and down across the central belt to some extent as well. So that's the parts of the UK that generate the wealth. The next map is where the wealth ends up. This is a map from the UK Office of National Statistics of the richest parts of the country in terms of household wealth. So not where it comes from, but where it ends up. This is a chart of households with just about £1 million worth of assets, and the percentage of households with that amount of value in parts of the country. The south of England, it's more than 13%, and the further north you go, it's less and less. In Scotland, it's less than 7% of the households have that amount of value. So you can see where the wealth comes from, and over the decades where it ends up. Okay. Now the next, and that just bears out the numbers I went through at the beginning. Scotland generates the tax, it's got the economic activity, but it doesn't stay here. And that kind of answers the paradox of why, when you look at the numbers, Scotland looks like a wealthy country, but when you go around Scotland, there's a lot of parts of it that sure don't look very wealthy, and that kind of answers that question, why that's the case. The next map is, money isn't everything. I mean, it's important, but it's not everything. This is everything. This is male life expectancy, average male life expectancy at birth by part of the UK. And again, the darker the colour, the lower the life expectancy. So Glasgow and the Western Isles, interestingly, have the lowest life expectancy in the UK at about 70 years, and then it gets progressively higher as you go down the country. And there's 3 dark green dots on there, they're so small you can't see them, where the life expectancy is over 82 years, and that is Chelsea, Kensington and Westminster, so it's no surprise. Now I come through from Glasgow tonight. I live in Glasgow, but I've got a plan. I'm going to move when I'm 69. So. Okay, so just to summarise that, too poor, aye right. Don't believe it. Don't let them tell you we can't afford it. The wealth's there. It's just how we choose to use it. So there's a question about, if that's true, why do you get people coming on the television and on the radio day in, day out telling us, and with a whole catalogue of them coming out today, from Danny Alexander all the way through, telling us we can't afford it, we're all doomed, or we won't be able to afford to pay for anything, we go independent. And the sad truth is that it comes down to vested interest. There's people that get paid a lot of money, plus a lot of expenses, for a nice cushy job. I mean, a Scottish MP's only got less than half of it with an English MP, because most of the stuff that's important already is done. It's done at Hollywood already anyway. So they've got a kind of easy life. They spent their whole career working their way up the greasy pole to get a safe seat, and then this independence malarkey comes along, and all of a sudden it's their whole career's under threat. So you can see why they're so keen to peddle the stories about we can't afford it, even if it involves making up a bunch of numbers like they did today to anybody that's been listening to what's been going on with our projections. I mean, I especially feel for Alistair Darling, because he's right at the bottom of that list. He's done his time in the Commons, he's waiting for his seat in the Lords, but the whole thing's at threatening, and you can see the panic setting in as the yes keeps up in the polls, and he thinks he might not end up in the Lords after all. And there's a nice wee quote that kind of summarises that. It's hard to get someone to understand something when their salary depends on not understanding it. It kind of sums it up. So there's a couple more things I'm just going to go through to give you a flavour, and it's really about scare stories. This one is from 1979, and there'll be people in here who'll remember 1979 like it was yesterday. There'll be other folk that say, what is this old guy talking about? I can just about remember 1979. I didn't have a vote, but I was a teenager at the time. And of course that was the first time I had the opportunity to vote for a Scottish Assembly, and yes, won the vote, but because of the way the rules are set up, the Assembly obviously never took place. And the funny thing, or the ironic thing, sad thing about this particular quote from the Daily Express editorial, you couldn't make this up, right? It's the Daily Express warning the people of Scotland of all the bad things that would happen to the Scottish economy if they had the audacity to vote yes to set up a Scottish Assembly. So of course the Assembly wasn't set up. And again, if you don't know your history, that's the list of what was the heart of Scottish industry going back in the 1960s and 70s, which of course was all wiped out in the 1980s by Thatcher. So there's a long history of scare stories and that they've been used to dispel people, trying to get people not to vote yes, and they're all easily debunked. And if you take the time to go and look at them, so learn from history. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. This is the third time I've asked them, so let's not get shamed this time. I'll go through pensions very quickly. This is a headline from the Daily Express editorial, the Daily Express headline from end of last year, and it's true. What they did was a study came out. 40 industrialised countries in the world. They looked at the state pension compared to the cost of living. Britain was number 39. Mexico was number 40. Just about every country in Europe has got a better pension than Britain has. Yet they've got the cheek to come out and tell us that if we dare to be independent, we won't be able to support the pension as it is. The reality is that the British state pension is a disgrace compared to any other civilised country in the world. And if you look at just the numbers on that, you look at social protection, which is welfare plus pensions added together, and you look at that as a percentage of government income, the tax take we've got, or as a percentage of the size of the economy, the GDP. In both cases, Scottish economy is much better able to support a decent pension than the UK is. So if they're telling you that Scotland can't afford a pension, then the UK is in a much worse position when it comes to that particular aspect. So I'm going to finish up now with a wee story for you. Just get a drink of water before I start. So this is a story that just kind of puts into context the opportunity that I think we've got here if we choose to take advantage of it in terms of Scotland in the future. And it's about the Prime Minister of Norway who was going for a wee walk down the fjord as you do. And he stumbles across the magic lamp and he picks it up and gives it a rub, and the genie pops out and the genie says to him, I'll give you some wishes to make Norway a better country. And the Prime Minister thinks for a bit and he says, that's a hard one. He said, we're just about the richest country in the world. They measure these things and tell us we're about the happiest country in the world. There's very little poverty, folk have got decent jobs, good income, they've got leisure time, and they've got money to enjoy it. It's a difficult thing to improve. He says, well, you'll need to think of something. So the Prime Minister says, well, I can think of a few things. Okay, on you go. So he said, we've got an economy that's strong, but it's based on oil, fisheries,